Business owners at Reddit, what's the most obnoxious reason an employee quit had to be fired over? Had a guy who we hired who showed a lot of potential, sales. He was a little arrogant and had a good sized ego, but wasn't enough of a problem. He was very good at sales and eventually it went to his head. He started showing up late all the time, leaving early, cutting corners where he could. The final straw came when he showed up late and someone spoke up about it to him. He decided the best choice of words he could yell were, "I make the most sales and I have the biggest dong so you can all F off." He was fired on the spot. Customers thought it was pretty funny though. The company I work is a contractor for a giant corporation and we go to different stores to do work. This new guy we hired seemed normal at first but it turned out he was a complete freaking idiot. So one day, he goes on site with one of the senior employees to shadow him. This genius thought that because we did work for the giant corporation we could just eat anything off the shelves and from the refrigerators free. Well, employee saw this and was like, "WTF are you doing? You need to pay," and manager comes. This guy then started fighting with the manager, then got in his car after and drove off. Needless to say his butt was fired the next day. I fired a guy because he said he couldn't come to work because it was raining and he had just washed his car the day before. I had an employee call off because it was raining and his car didn't have windshield wipers. That was a brand new excuse for me, so I'll let him have the day off. Once, I used to manage a store in the mall. One of my employees, I'm pretty sure, was cheating on her husband with a mall security guard. I would come by on my days off and he'd scurry out in a fluster. I never mentioned it, but the guy was coming by all the time to the point that it was keeping her from doing her job. Finally, we had a work meeting and I said in a very non-accusatory way, something like this: "I know it gets slow in here during the week, and I'm guilty of it myself, but from now on I need everyone to keep personal visits to a minimum or during your lunch break." She stands up and starts screaming at me. How dare I accuse her? I'm a B. She quits. She continued to call me and leave me harassing voicemail for a while too. Tool and die shop owner here. One of our machinists would go out for lunch and slam back 3-4 beers every day. When I found out I told him he can't drink beer at lunch. He said it was his time and what he did at lunch was his business, not mine. The next day he came back from lunch smelling like beer. I let him go on the spot. A few years later he showed up in my office asking for his old job back. He said that he was an alcoholic back then and was sorry for his behavior. He was now sober and needed a job. I hired him on the spot and it worked out great for 5 or 6 years. Then he started drinking again and I had to let him go a second time. I have no idea how he is doing now, but I often wonder. He was a great machinist and a nice guy when he was sober. Not my business but my dad's. He hired predominantly people with criminal records and literally all they had to do was inspect rental cars for damage as the cars left the lot and keep their noses clean. You could do pretty much anything you wanted on your downtime with no complaints from my dad as long as he didn't get any complaints from the owners of the car lot. One day one of the supervisors for the car lot I worked for walks out and asks me for my dad's number. Supervisor had caught a guy stealing gas from the property. He even had security camera footage of it happening. Dude was instantly fired. I worked for a boutique hotel. You know, small, cute, expensive AF. As an ops manager. Basically, unless the area manager had to come in, I was the law. I get a frantic call on my downtime from an employee claiming our overnight guy tried to assault him. I have a sigh, as the guy freaking out is notorious for being a drama queen. I load up the security camera on my home PC, go to the time frame, and holy crap. Our night guy legitimately lunged at his co-worker and tried to strangle him. Luckily a desk was between them, and that gave the victim time to bolt. Instantly felt like a don for doubting him. Well, this is when I call in the area manager. We show up at the crack of dawn and speak with the dude who made the attack and he claims he didn't do it. We show him the video, and I kid you not he responds with, "I don't recall the events of that evening." We fired him on the spot. What started the fight, you ask? Well, the victim had done extra work to make the attacker's shift easier. The attacker felt like this was an insult to his work ethic. Oh, and I got multiple reference requests from similar hotels asking for a good reference. I simply said I wasn't able to provide a positive reference, as legally that was all I could say. My wife and I started a small software company 20 years ago. She's the manager and does sales and HR. I do the programming. Anyway, we hired a programmer one time, and the first day on the job I spent the whole morning with him going over our development philosophy, how we do source control, etc., and then showed him an overview of our applications and how we build them. Along the way he was highly critical, pointing out what he considered flaws in everything. After lunch he goes back in to see my wife. He obviously didn't know we were married, we don't share surname, and at work we keep pretty much to ourselves. He says to my wife, "You know how to fix this company? You need to fire that other guy." We still laugh about that one. I used to do some consulting work and hired a woman to help out. Mostly clerical stuff and whatnot. I flew down to St. Thomas for a meeting and got a call from Sonatrol at 10:30 p.m. She had keys to my building but didn't know about the alarm. Basically, she and her boyfriend brought another couple down to have a foursome in one of my offices I had converted to a bedroom where I could crash if I worked late. So I called her. She answered mid-coitus and acted normal, albeit a little tipsy. I talked about a few mundane details I needed to relay to her anyways, and then mentioned to make sure she only was ever at the office between 7 AM and 7 PM, since there was a silent alarm that would call me with audio of activities in the building. When I got back in town, her keys were sitting on my desk. Not a business owner, but at a previous job we had issues with food being stolen from the break room fridge. The company made a big stink about it and it kept happening, so they very obviously installed security cameras in the break room. Like big freaking cameras in plain sight, pointing at the fridge, with our bosses being very direct about "There is the camera. You really want to lose your job over eating someone's sandwich?" Few days later guy gets fired for stealing food. Literally on camera, just grabbing people's lunch out of the fridge and eating it. Employee had corporate card, charge of vacation, purse, fossil watch, takeout, along with overall being miserable to work with. Had laptop stolen within weeks of joining. Fired her, and a few days later a watch catalog from Fossil showed up at the office with her name on it. Have active court cases for all the theft. My dad and I ran a business together cleaning out foreclosed homes for a real estate agency as I was finishing high school. I was a senior, so I got out at lunchtime and we could usually get a house done in a half day. Sometimes we'd get some bad ones and we had a few guys that we would call to see if they wanted to make a quick $100 for a day's work. On my literal last day of class my dad picked up one of our usual guys and got one house about 90% done by lunch. He was a pretty normal guy that we had never had any trouble with. The guy we paid to help my dad went out to the truck and came back into that house with a gun and robbed my dad of his wallet and took his keys and left in our truck. Funny thing is, my dad only had the cash he was about to give him an hour later for finishing up the house. The state police got the guy's number from us and they told him some bogus story about how my dad was being investigated for not paying his workers, and if met them with the truck they would get his statement and let him go. Idiot pulls up and gets arrested on the spot. He got 8 years in prison. I sold Kirby vacuum cleaners for a day. We drove around in a van and knocked at doors. The driver owned a franchise or something, so he would come in and close the deal. I sold one on my first day. I called him and he came in and asked the buyer if there was anything he did not like about the deal. Of course the buyer said that the price was a little high. So the franchise owner knocked off my whole commission. His reasoning was that if I sold a couple more I would be in some higher commission rate or something. I said screw that and took the tea home. Hounded him for weeks. He finally gave me the money after I showed up at his house at 1:30 AM. What an a-hole. When I was working at this Japanese restaurant we had to fire one of the new cooks his first day because he showed up drunk. I actually had to go pick him at the bus station because I was the delivery driver. When I pulled up there I saw him finishing a tall boy of Bud Light. I was thinking, oh man, this might not be good. He got in the car and seemed okay, so I thought maybe it would be alright. When we got to the restaurant, I didn't see much of him because I was out in the front on the register, but man did I hear a lot. While the owner Carol and the other cooks were training him on what to do, he kept messing up and knocking things over. The final straw was when he accidentally lit a rag on fire. "That was it," she screamed. "You're fired. Get the F out." She had me drive him back to bus station, and let me tell you, that was an incredibly awkward car ride. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe for more videos and don't forget to like the video if you've enjoyed it.